Good evening, everyone. My name is Mazes, okay? I am delighted to be a co host this evening with Dr. Arunma Oteh, and I welcome everyone, this evening to this space. So, we are basically getting ready to kickstart in the next 4 minutes. I'm glad that we have so much interest and that a lot of people have joined this space this evening. Thank you once more. Thank you, Dr. Arunmote, for having me as a co host on this wonderful space. It is indeed a privilege. I'm glad. Thank you.
I'm absolutely delighted to have you as a co-host. I admire the great work you do with Njenje Media, bringing um, issues to the forefront. And I know that you're just as devastated as I am about the floods in Nigeria. But I can see, as you pointed out, there's a lot of interest on this very, very important topic. Our other co host, Benjamin, has just joined as well. Welcome, Benjamin. I hope I've accepted your request. Yes, I have accepted your request. And I want to thank also those who sent, I think there were three people who indicated that they would like to share their perspectives today. One of them is an amazing woman, Miss Chibugo Okafor, who's a business owner. We met when she was here at the business school at University of Oxford doing her MBA, and I've been fascinated by her business that she runs between Nigeria and the UK. We also have, and I'm trying to find his name. I know his Twitter handle. So if he can also request the mic, Great God is his Twitter handle uh, name. Who is also very passionate about these issues and has shared some work that the World Bank has done in terms of preparedness. And of course, makes the point around that one of the reasons the flood issues are more challenging for Nigeria are actually the 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 lack of risk management, appropriate infrastructure, and planning. We have a third speaker, but now that it's who I will also introduce, and I would ask them to request mics. I see some people have already requested mics. So let me, since it's 5 o'clock exactly, and since we have a tradition of always starting on time, let me introduce the third edition of my Twitter space, Climate Change Enroute COP 27. As you all know, my name is Arunma Oteh. I'm a scholar at University of Oxford, as well as a member of the Global Leadership Council of the Said Business School. I'm absolutely delighted to host today's Twitter space and co-host it alongside Benjamin Major, who's been with me from the very beginning, and Mazi Ezoke, who joined us today. I want to thank both of you for your passion for this topic, for the great work that you do. And I know, Benjamin, you have a conflict, but you're still um, joining us for a little bit. I have to also say that I'm absolutely impressed with the number of people who indicated that they will be participating today. As at my last count, it was already over 700 people. So I want to say thank you to each one of you for joining this edition of My Twitter Space on climate change and Route COP27. For those who had joined previously, or maybe before that, I'll talk about how we're going to organize ourselves today. So the first part, as I've shared, will be an interactive session on what I consider the devastating and unfortunate floods in Nigeria. The second part will be on the climate finance landscape in Nigeria. And I'm delighted that we will have the lead author of the report of the Climate Policy Initiative and others, share the information that they've put together in this respect. But before I go further on today's edition, let me say a few words about the past two editions. The first one, of course, as those of you who were on it will remember, was on the ABC of climate change and a focus on the issues for Africa as we prepare for COP27, which is in literally, I would say, in 2 weeks' time. The second edition was on the landscape of climate finance in Africa. And we had the CEO of FSD Africa, Mark Napier, join us and lead us through that. We also had a case study on the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is really a basin of wealth, in my view, for the entire world, not just Africa. And we had Right Honorable Janine Mabunda lead us through that. Fortunately, Twitter provides us an opportunity to keep recordings. So for those who haven't had a chance to listen to those recordings, those who weren't able to participate in those earlier editions, they do have a chance to listen to those recordings. I also want to acknowledge Ingenger Media, because Ingenger Media produced two YouTube versions of the recordings for ease of reference. I'm pleased, as I said, with the response that I've received in respect of this space. It shows, as I've said before, that many of us are aware that climate change is existential, and particularly for low-income countries in Africa and Asia, because the negative impact of climate change is higher on these countries, on the poor, and on the vulnerable. Developing countries face worse impacts because of weak early warning systems and poor risk management. And this is very evident from the devastating impact of floods, which we will be focusing on today. During the first edition, you'll recall that I mentioned the increase in the number, the frequency, the size, and the impact of natural disasters and shared some examples. The one that I shared was about Pakistan. You remember I shared what The Economist said on the 3rd of September, that for 2 months, vast swathes of Pakistan have been inundated by its heaviest rainfall on record. So this was The Economist of 3rd September. Over 1,100 people had been killed at the time they wrote their report, and the early estimates put the cost at $10 billion. On August 30th, their climate minister said that 1/3 of the country was underwater. The government declared 72 out of its 160 districts to be disaster zones. Similarly, Nigeria has had the worst floods in a decade, and this has affected 33 of its 36 states, as well as its federal capital territory. What is worse is that the response has been slow, has been insufficient, and so there's also a devastating impact in the short term, but the medium to long term effects on well-being, on the economy, are even worse. Nigeria is, according to the Climate Policy Initiative, the 53rd most vulnerable country, and the 6th least ready to adapt to climate change. So, my goal for today is to focus our next 55 minutes on leading an interactive session on the floods in Nigeria. As I said, there are a few people who have indicated upfront that they will speak. So I invite them to request for the mic. But I will leave it open. What I would really appreciate is if you have um, specific experiences. Sorry, I'm trying to accept requests. If you have specific experiences um, that you want to share, that you're aware of, please do so. Benjamin, may I hand over to you to share with us again the rules, or but I think we'll give people a few more minutes this time, since people are sharing about them. I don't know if you agree, maybe 3 minutes maximum, and people should introduce themselves and then share the specific experience or a solution or an idea that they have. There are three people who had requested the mic, who had sent me an email up front, who will have a little bit more time given the topics that they want to talk about. So I will be accepting requests if I know exactly what to do. I'm doing my best. I think I've added some. So Benjamin, please let me hand over to you. I think I need to I must have lost Mazi as a co-host, so I'm re-inviting him. Okay. So Benjamin, over to you, please.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Aguman. I want to thank everybody for taking your time to be present here on this wonderful space at the third edition of Climate Change Route COP27, and also an interactive session with the flood in Nigeria that is currently ravaging the entire continent. Um, as you know, we always follow one of those rules that makes us to have a smooth space meeting. Please, if you are given the mic, endeavor to yield to the following rules. Make sure you ask your question within a minute, and if you're asking a question, make sure you stay on the topic so that we won't be dancing around and wasting much time. And while other people are talking, please try and mute your mic so that the other listener will not be interrupted, or rather, so that we'll not be having interference from other appliances that is close to each other and all those things. And most importantly, please, here is not about politics. Keep politics out of it. Stay on the topic, and once you find out that you are going out of the topic, we'll kindly and caution you. And if you decided not to follow what is being stated, then we can decide to remove from the speaker session. Thank you, like I said before, once again for being part of this program, and we are very happy to have you here, Mr. Manzi. Please, I want to add you again. Doctor, we send you a request as a co-host so that you
I
cannot.
believe I'd sent him a request as a co-host.
I'm
We'll
trying to
do it
accept him
again.
as. I'm trying to accept him back.
Okay. Is it working?
I'm trying my best.
Okay. Can I let you do that while we invite because there are there's a Mr. Abdi, there's somebody who a Lieber. Sorry, my device is not letting me. So please go ahead. How do I invite somebody to speak?
Um, which which of the participant you want to invite?
So there is an LEBE on my phone who's raised their hand. There's also a Kelly who's raised their hand.
Kelly. Okay, Liberty. Liberty is raising up a hand,
Yes.
and
So Liberty,
Kelly.
Kelly, and Abdi in that order.
Okay. Can we have Kelly, please? Kelly, if you're there, please kindly unmute your mic and go on with your question. Kelly, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Everyone
Please go on.
was muted. Thank you very much for hosting this space, Aruma, the host and also the co-host. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to ask my question in maybe two branches. First, with respect to the floods in Nigeria, I think I don't know if there's any substantive data to show over a certain period of time to see the amount of rains that we are receiving. If that can substantiate it, there is a school of thought that believes that part of some of the effects that we are seeing now is also due to perhaps some of the rivers that have not been dredged or sealed properly planned in terms of um, the tributaries over a long period of time. So, and then secondly, since we're talking about climate change here, I think it's also a good time for us as a government to start looking at this, because I think and this may be my own personal view. I do not know of any real organization out there, maybe from the ministry or parastatals, set up to tackle this kind of flood situations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. By the way, we have an interactive session, so comments are welcome, as well as any questions that you have. And anybody who wants to respond to the question can also do so. So we have, so can we go with Liberty next then?
Hello, good day everyone. Hello, Dr. Aruma and Benjamin Mayo, co-host. My name is Ben Alifa. I'm sharing my experience from a personal perspective. I happen to be from Bayelsa State. And my first personal experience with flooding was back in 2012 when my village, along with other villages in Bayelsa, was flooded. And my father's house literally collapsed. And the painful thing is my brother and I just renovated the property for my dad just before the rainy season. And now we are back to the flood again. And I'm being told my village is underwater, my hometown. So it's been very worrying. I have had to be mobilizing some friends who are there. Last week we did relief, as individuals very concerned to OD, local government that has 3 communities, and the feedback has been most harrowing and very heartbreaking. I guess for me, I'm just kind of just openly appealing if, there are lots of people wanting to help. I'm told that we have IDP camps just only in the capital city, town, but a lot of people are trapped in the inner communities. And the biggest problem we're having is accessibility. And because because I'm currently based in the UK, but I'm working with other friends down there and we're trying to raise the little we can. We were challenged by logistics of trying to reach these people because the roads are cut off. It was precarious, it was not safe. So we are not even sure how to go back again a second time. And the community, they're asking us to come back. We have very little to give them, but they were so grateful that we even reached them. So it's actually a very precarious situation for a lot of people right now. So we are just so frustrated. We are just wondering if the big
I know how devastating it must be. I saw some of the pictures and I just wept. Most of it. I think your appeal is such an important one, and I hope that that action can be taken. Thank you so much. Let me hand over to Abdi. Sorry, I'm seeing short forms of people's names. If people can introduce themselves properly and be concise, so that we can get many more people speak. I see that Chi Okafor has joined us, who is one of our speakers that I had spoken to previously. So after Abdi, I would like Chi to say a few words. Thank you. Abdi, go ahead.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
I see you have some children in the background. Are
Wait,
you ready to
wait.
speak or?
Just give me a second. Dr. Aruma, please, can you bring up Manzi as a co-host?
Experiences to leadership failure in Nigeria. Can I say having the right leadership?
Sorry, have we lost Mr. Abdi or?
Okay, now we
I'm
have.
still, yeah, I'm here.
Just hold on. Just give me a sec. Just hold on, please. Hold on. Manzi is going to be coordinating, bringing people on, and taking people off this speaker session. He's going to be assisting Dr. Awoman at the moment. And please, let us make sure we follow the rules and regulations. And thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you. So can we have Ms. Chiokafo next, please? Thank you so much for accepting up front, because I thought your experience as a business owner is extremely useful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me, Madam Oteh. I'm on ground in Nigeria at the moment, and we, attempted to visit our farm. So I own farms across Nigeria. I'm, into honey farming. And I mean, the conversation of climate issues and how they affect Africa, particularly in Nigeria and in the context of being a business owner, is not something that a conversation that started just today. But, the floods have now caught the attention of people because it's made transportation of goods from the rural areas to urban areas that much more difficult, and in some places actually impossible. Our farms being in the rural areas, I'd like to speak on behalf of rural farmers, which the majority of them are actually women. If you didn't know, 70% of farmers in Africa are female farmers. Upon the very many issues that affect them, which are the social cultural norms, the insecurity of being a woman in rural farms, the poor access to market, we're now adding this secondary layer or tertiary layer of the floods, which makes it impossible for them to be able to move their harvested goods to the necessary places. And you can imagine that the impact of that is tenfold, because they're not able to go on to feed their homes and remain sustainable income generators. So the sad thing about these issues is that the most affected tend to be the most marginalized in society, and in this case, rural farmers. Again, for us, our bees have been unable to. We're in the quote unquote the honey flow period, which is the time where bees are supposed to go out and start to make honey for us, but that's been delayed. If you are on ground in Nigeria, you know that we've just about moved out of raining season, but we're delayed moving out of raining season. We should have. That should have ended in September, but it just happened. Well, hopefully we're out of it now, but we haven't had rain for about 4 days now, so it looks like we're in the clear. But that's delayed the whole process a whole additional month. And these are people's livelihoods. This is how people actually take food from the farm and into the mouth and into their respective homes. And I think someone mentioned again, part of there being failed leadership. It all tallies into the awareness on ground in Africa and the response, I think, on ground in Africa to these issues being delayed, or in some areas there being none at all. Again, the marginalized groups in Africa, who make up the majority of these countries, will be most affected by this shift in our climate.
Thank you so much for those points that you made, and I think you're alluding to what the earlier speaker, whose Twitter handle says Kelly, said. And I think that for Nigeria, it's particularly unfortunate because 10 years ago, we had floods. Nigeria had floods that were really devastating. I remember them. I remember the work that the then government had done. And recently, Dr. Essie Ovie and I, actually today, this morning, we'd had an exchange where he was saying that we've had our early warning 10 years ago, so you would expect that we'll be better prepared. And so if he is on the call, it'll be nice for him to share some thoughts given his initiative on climate in Africa. So while we're waiting for him, I see a few others who've raised their hands. Oluyinka Oyeniji, please.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, ma'am. I can't start to express how much I can commend you for all that you've done, but I'm happy I'm part of this platform today. Right. So for me, looking at climate change from the Nigerian perspective, it's a global phenomenon, and it has different perspectives of it we could consider. So number one, the whole world is talking about renewable energy and all of that. And almost suddenly, so Nigeria in a quagmire, we are now producing country and all contributing to fossil fuels and all of that. We are supposed to be wind off oil and then to consider renewable energy and all of that. All right. So that was the first quagmire we were in and trying to grapple with transiting from being oil producing to embracing renewable energy and having to abandon the major income earner for our economy at this time. But consider it, what climate change is looking at to me is that we won't have so much of sun anymore. It looks to me like instead of thinking that we were going to have so much heat and then it will affect farm produce and all of that, what we are going to be witnessing is the devastation of rains and flooding. Now, it's witnessed all over the country. However, the impact is told in silos and all of that. So, what should we be doing as a nation that's going into the next elections regarding environmental disasters? All right. So, first of all, I'm genuinely surprised that the president is saying he's giving a minister 3 months, 90 days to be able to find a solution to this. I think this is crass. I think it's irresponsible at the very minimum. And it shows to a large extent how we don't value life. All right. So the low hanging fruits and the short term plan will be to provide relief materials to victims and all of that. But what then happens if we can't start thinking of the positive benefit of this disaster? Can we start to gather these waters, these floods to be able to generate energy? Who is talking about building dams to collect these waters for irrigation and for power generation? And I think that we should make it an electoral issue where if you're voting candidates, whether they are local government chairmen or they are senators or legislators or even governors and then an individual for the office of the president, what do they reckon this will be? Because it won't get better. Okay, Lagos has been witnessing the devastation of flooding, as far as I know, for the past 5 years. All right, so it's happening all over the country. Are we going to elect officials who even have an understanding of what is to come? The rains will pour more, areas will get more flooded in the next 4 years, for example. So if you are voting someone who doesn't prioritize climate action, then it means that for the next 4 or 5 years, we are talking relief materials. It means for the next...
Thank you very much. I'd like to be able to give others an opportunity. You've raised some very pertinent issues. And, like you, we're all very passionate about. Please. So please, as you're requesting the mic, I'll invite others to speak. Please try and respect the 3 minutes. I don't think any of the previous speakers has managed to, and I know how passionate this issue is for all of us. And I'm really, really sorry about what's been, the devastation in Bielsa. It's mind-boggling. So I can imagine how emotional each one of you who has a home in Bielsa feels about this. So I'd like to ask Kate Okorie, Please go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this space. So my name is Kate, and I'm a science journalist with Bird Story Agency. And fortunately, I would also be in Egypt covering this issue of climate change and what Nigeria is doing as regards this issue. So personally, I've been affected by this flood because about some days ago, I had to go to Abuja because I had to pick up my visa. And for each time I was on the road, it was a different experience. I mean, because I'm currently in Niger State, and then it takes about 5 hours to get to Abuja. But I get to spend longer time on the road because the road from Bida to Mina has broken, like it has broken into two. At the start of the raining season, it was a bit mild, but now when you pass through that road, you're going to see a very big gully in between. So cars have to like take turns to move past there. And then so this is actually I'm actually trying to be as precise as possible. So this is a personal experience, and then also I'm also going to talk from the perspective of a journalist. So I've actually noticed that there's an absence of data, and it's very disappointing considering that this is not an isolated event. It has already been said, we we had this same experience 10 years ago, and we would have expected studies to elaborate on what happened, and also expected the government to have done better as regards the Dasin outside dam that is currently abandoned. And if you check the if you check the forecast by the Nigerian Meteorological Service, you will find out that about 7 states were predicted to suffer flooding as a result of the transboundary water movement, which is the overflow of the River Niger and the Benue, which is contributed by the release of water from the Cameroon dam. But then aside from the 7 states, you would see that the remaining states, like majority of the other states, were predicted to suffer flooding due to flash floods. Um, but then, having had the opportunity to speak to people in directly affected states, I'm talking about people in Lokoja, Bayelsa, especially, they are actually prone to seasonal flooding. But having had the opportunity to speak to sources in this state, you would find out that the intensity is even greater than what they have ever experienced. So, in my opinion, I have, even though there is no data, but I'm pretty much convinced that this flooding going on in Nigeria is due to both the lack of proper water control measures and the intensity of the rainfall. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those very useful inputs. I think Dr. Essie, you now have the mic. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Madam Oteh. It's a pleasure to speak this evening. Thanks so much for the audience. I want to start first by thanking Mrs. Oteh for doing what a couple of us have actually been discussing in the past, the dichotomy between the core and the periphery in the global south. As she rightly mentioned when she spoke, the poor and vulnerable guys in Africa suffer the most from climate issues. And compared to the richer countries in the global south, like India, China, and Brazil, who actually have better adaptation strategies, the guys in Africa suffer the most. So for us, the key issue is, yes, there's indeed a causal link between climate change and the flood. As most people would know, the minute the atmosphere starts warming up, it creates more vapor and you then get more rains coming down. But that said, I think the key issue for us today is, why are we in this mess? so to speak. As Madam Oteh mentioned, we had this crisis 10 years ago. At the time, President Jonathan gave out 17 billion. And 10 years after, nothing has changed. And I think the answer is simple. As the failure of leadership, as the failure of regulatory craft, and as also a failure to actually have proper adaptation strategies. One more thing I want to raise is the fact that, yes, we've got a Climate Change Commission in place. We've got a Climate Change Commission Act. But like I said in a couple of my interventions a few years ago, the Nigerian Climate Change Commission law only creates a bureaucracy. When you compare that with the UK's Climate Change Act of 2008, the UK Act sets out ambitious targets, binding legal obligations, and a clear legal regime for responding to climate change. So I think for us, beyond the failure of regulations, we also do not have the appropriate legal framework. And most importantly, we've not also had the right adaptation strategy. Warning signs are near non-existent. We don't have the right infrastructure like dams to mitigate against the floods when they do come. We also don't have the right framework of financing sustainable infrastructure. So while we commiserate and actually share the pains of the people who are affected by these floods, we do need to ask ourselves certain key questions. What is the current regulatory response, not just for Nigeria, but for the peripheral countries in the global south? How do they intend to rejig their laws in such a manner that makes these regulations capable of responding to flood disasters such as this? So I think for us, while we brainstorm this evening, we do need to remain mindful of the fact that the peripheral countries of the global south, such as Nigeria, need to rethink their policy formulation mechanism. We need to begin to think like the Netherlands, which is a country literally inside water, but has managed to use reverse engineering to create dams and reservoirs to actually help them handle the floods disasters. So I think, like I said, before I wrap up, I know there's no time, ours is simply a failure of leadership, most importantly, a failure or an absence of regulations, and our penchant for actually pushing through laws that actually create bureaucracies as opposed to a clear legal regime that would aid us in our regulatory responses to flood. Thanks again, Ms. Oteh, and thanks everyone.
Thank you very much. I think you've helped me with responding to some of the questions that were asked earlier. And if need be, I hope you'll stay on.
Yeah, I'm here.
I may bring you back to react to some other points. So thank you so much for those very insightful comments. I'm asking Ngozeka, Mindful NG. I just love all these Twitter handles that are very interesting. So please go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I chanced on this space and I'm so happy I joined in. I want to talk about the floods, and I'm taking us back to 2010 when the Nigerian Erosion and Watershed Management, NUMAP, it was a World Bank collaboration with the Nigerian government to manage, among other things, gully erosion in the southeast and then I think land degradation in the north. Now, what I want to point out is I want to bring this to the president's ultimatum to the water resources minister to come up with a plan within 90 days. And I want to ask, why are we always so reactive instead of being proactive? I mean, this project, if I'm not mistaken, took off in 2010. And part of its obligation was to come up with a sort of management on how to improve landslides and flood preparedness. But 2 years later, after the project was launched, we had this kind of flood, on the same scale, 2012, and nothing. And I'm wondering, why do we always have to wait for these things to happen? Then we start running helter-skelter like a headless chicken. You have people building on floodplains. You have people building on waterways. The authorities do absolutely nothing. I recall a case last 2 years in Anambra where a popular pastor was asked to remove his church that was on a waterway. He refused. And when the authorities took action and removed this church after several warnings, people came for the government. And I'm like, why? Why do you always do this? Can't we see that we are on problems? You build on a waterway, where do you want the water to go?
Thank you very much. I think you've raised another issue, which is there is the role of the government, but there is the role of us as citizens in following the rules. And one of the reasons for having this space is to create greater awareness as to our roles and responsibilities. Yes, there may be a failure in leadership, but what are we as individuals doing? And this is your example of how people reacted to a church being asked to move from probably a place where it's covering a drainage is an extremely great example. Thank you so much. Let me then ask Demi, Ms. Fayemiwora, I assume, from looking at your Twitter handle. Please go ahead, introduce yourself, what you do, and then your comments.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Demi Lade, but you can call me Demi. I'm a public policy analyst, and I have worked on climate change issues for about 7 years now. I'm also a scientist, so I have a science background and a master's in public policy. So regarding the floods in Nigeria, it's really interesting, and I'm very glad that a lot of people have already touched on this, to see what Nigeria's climate change strategy has been and what the response of the public has been as well. So when I engage with people on climate change, people tend to be a bit apprehensive, mostly because they see the climate change policy as being directed by the West and something that the Western governments dictate. But I just want to reiterate in this space, as I have done on so many engagements on Twitter, that climate change adaptation for Nigeria is a good thing. Like, we need an adaptation strategy because Nigeria is in danger of very sudden floods, like someone said, flash floods. And not just sudden, but also really more frequent. So we're saying the last flood was about 10 years ago. There is a possibility that the next one will be much shorter from now. And so we need to start thinking about people voting or holding public officials responsible for their climate change mandates when they are asking for your vote. So it's not simply about people saying we're going to build infrastructure, we're going to build roads. Nigeria needs to invest in sustainable urban drainage systems. And these are systems that are not your conventional gutters. These are systems that are built around nature to ensure that your drainage systems are long-lasting, sustainable, and can withstand climate change. Something else I want to point out is that Nigeria's climate strategy at the moment focuses a lot on mitigation. And by mitigation, I mean it focuses on reducing emissions, which is a good thing overall, because yes, that's what everyone is doing. But for a country as disadvantaged as Nigeria and a country that has missed a lot of development opportunities, adaptation is really the key to how this can be achieved. So I would like to just implore everyone, and again, thank you for having me, to vote for adaptation as the climate strategy, because that is the way Nigeria will make it, especially with regards to the changes in rainfall and changes in temperature. I've looked at the IPCC projections for Nigeria and they don't look good. A lot of the places will have like plus 7%, like an increase of 7% in rainfall within the next 5 years. And some places will have up to 27%. That is a lot of rain that's coming because Nigeria already enjoys a lot of rain. And it's a country that is not arid. There's a lot of water already. So there's a chance that most of the coastal cities are in danger. So please, please, by all means, if you're voting, you need to see the mandates of your public officials with regards to their climate strategy. And it should be focusing on adaptation, not just providing electricity, but addressing issues of infrastructure that can help address things like flooding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some additional thoughts that you've shared with us. I can see really your experience of as being a scientist and a policy maker has come through. And I like your point around the analysis of the Nigerian climate strategy being focused on mitigation and encouraging a greater focus on adaptation, given that we're one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. Thank you very much. The next person in the queue is Fola, and I've given you the speaker, so please go ahead. The mic, so please go ahead.
All right, good evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Aruma, for having us. Please, okay, what I have to say might be a bit long, but because of
So
the
you
three
need to
minutes
make it
involved,
short because there's quite
yes,
a
I
lot of
would make it
people.
short.
Yes.
I'll probably have to write an article and copy you so that a lot
Absolutely.
more
By the
people
way,
can read about it.
you've given me an opportunity to share. I would ask that any of you who wants to share some of the highlights on Twitter that you shared. If you want to tag me, that's fine. I'll do my best to retweet it. But remember, Twitter is very, a lot likes you to be concise so that you say what you need to say. So please go ahead, Fola.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, recently, one of the leading presidential candidates, towards the 2023 elections, in response to a question about climate change, in fact, that the issue of climate change was not really a priority for us, as we are a poor nation, and quite a number of people agreed with that stance. And this even included people who were not, particularly supporting his presidential bid. And that was a bit of a worry for me, because they are of the opinion that we should focus on economic growth first. And since we are not amongst the major emitters of greenhouse gases in the world, then it shouldn't be so much of our priority. Well, climate change is a lot more, a lot more.
Time. So please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Mom. Yes, I'll just add on to what the Dr. Osei said. I would point out that lack of leadership failure actually, and failure of the people to become actively involved in governance as well, and also holding themselves accountable in doing the things that would also help in preventing some of these challenges is the issue. My question is, we've seen how the Nigerian president flies to South Korea without visiting states affected by flood and having a first-hand experience about what their challenges are. My question is, can I say that having the right leadership is 50% solution to in terms of implementing policies and programs that prevents this experiences from happening? Can I say that having the right leadership is 50% a solution, a visionary leadership that can do something about it? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, but I think that we should also expand leadership to be leadership at all levels. And not just yes, the president has his responsibility, but we have leaders at the ward level in Nigeria, at the local government area. We have governors. We have leaders of families, which is why your point around also broadening accountability and that point that one of the earlier speakers made around a church that was in the wrong place and the reaction of the congregation to that church being moved. So there's a lot of work for everybody. Would be my reaction to what you've just shared. So Mazi, should I let you manage the speakers?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
I have moved some people down. I think we'll now have space. If you don't mind, I think can we take Wisdom Atulegu?
Okay, it's a good morning from this part of the world, and thank you, Dr. Arunma Oteh, and then the organizers of this space for an insightful thought. Mine is more like a kind of question, and I just want to ask, does anyone know if there has been like a kind of study to understand the trajectory of the flooding? And secondly,
Sorry,
since we know, like, sorry,
Go ahead. I think my co-host must have been interrupted.
Okay,
Okay.
sorry.
Good.
Yeah. Then secondly, most of the things we are saying here is kind of reference to 10 years of leadership failure and thereabout. So it's clear even to a blind man that there is leadership failure in addressing this climate change in Nigeria. So is there a place for a kind of private partnership to deal with this particular issue, especially with respect to those states or communities that are affected? And do we know what it kind of takes? Does it need government approval and all that? Because beyond looking at those mitigation, will I say? Efforts, we have to also start looking at the prevention, techniques. So that's why I'm asking these two questions, and I'll be glad if I could get any, insight on them. Thank you.
We by the way, we have 7 minutes before we'll probably start to switch to the landscape of climate finance in Nigeria, because I think money is also important. And one of the things that our speaker will do is, in addition to outlining the issues around climate finance, she'll probably talk about some of these other issues. So I'd like to give some time to that. I will borrow some time, given that there's still a few speakers. So maybe we'll take another 5 to 10 minutes. And then we'll switch to the presentation that Ms. Shavi Metal is going to make to us. Maybe what I should do, in the interest of managing the time, we'll have another speaker, Cliff, and then there's somebody who's using my face as their handle, and Chidosky. And then we will then switch to, I'll then introduce the second part of the discussion. Attempt to summarize where we are, then introduce the second part, and then if we have a little bit more time at the end, we can have a few more conversations on the floods in Nigeria. But it's obviously such an important issue for us. So Cliff, please.
Yeah, good evening, ma. My name is. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good evening, ma. My name is Timothy. I'm a doctor. For me, coming from a developing country, I think the developing countries should focus on when it comes climate change is bad, very, very bad. So right from the days of Noah, we should equally say there was climate change. And I think developing countries should focus on the area that concerns them. Like now, we have the flooding. Some people have said the reason for the flooding, we have not been able to have our own dam. We have not been able to dredge the Niger. We should focus on those areas that concern us. Because some other countries, their problem may be, like in America, what happened when Biden came in? Because of the climate change activities, he decided to start fighting the oil companies. Before you know it, you have problem with fuel. And today, it's a different kettle of fish. Even though they are blaming everything, the price of gas on the Ukraine war. But the truth is that if we want to be truthful, the truth is that the price of gas was going up even before the Ukraine war. So for me, developing countries, we should, when we say climate change, like one of the presidential aspirants in Nigeria, the first time he was asked in America about climate change, he said he doesn't know much about that area. And to me, that was a very, very honest answer. The truth is that most of the people talking about climate change in the world today are politicians. And if you keep 10 professors in a room to talk about climate change, all of them, you have different sides of the stories. So the summary of what I'm saying, developing countries like Nigeria should focus on area. Like we know we have problem with flooding. We want to have clean air. We want to have clean water. Let us focus on those areas rather than because of today.
Okay.
Our problem here
Thank
may
you
not
very
be.
much. All of you must help me make your
Yes.
point concisely. If a point has already been made, please just acknowledge it. Because I see that even though I've said that we should start to close, we still have a number of people who are requesting for the mic. So can I have Charles Ikeriong?
Good evening, Mr. Oteh. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. I'm calling from Southeast in Nigeria. There is something we are not talking about. That is the air quality in the Southeast and the acid rain that is going on here. Let me tell us what is going on here about the acid rain. Most cars in the southeast, especially in Owerri, where I'm calling from, uh, there is there is corrosion. All the cars, the paints are constantly wearing away within a very short time, and nobody is talking about it. Now, the air quality in the southeast, especially in Owerri, is very bad, very bad. When I came into Owerri some years back, I was using mask. Then from time to time, I started getting used to it. Now, to me, it is like nothing is happening there because I have lived here now for 3, 4 years over here. The air quality is very bad. A lot of people are dying due to respiratory diseases. Nobody is talking about it. So that is what I want to bring up here. Thank you very much for organizing this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What about Mr. Inca connoisseur Leonardo? Please go ahead. Okay. Dr. Ovia, why don't you just make some remarks and then I will close because I'm uh, I'm trying to make sure that we have enough time to focus on the second part of our space today. So please, Dr. Ovia, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you had asked to speak again. Okay, maybe it's an error on my part. Sorry, I see that there are 3 requests. Let me pause the conversation on the flooding and then switch over to the landscape of climate finance because as I said, we'll need money. But I feel that this has been a very rich conversation. Half of me is very happy. The other half is a bit sad because there's so much more that we can talk about. But I really appreciate the perspectives that we got from Ms. Chioka and the 2 people who have homes in Bayelsa, who basically gave us first-hand information around some of what they're facing. Their homes being underwater, in addition to the challenges of farming, Ms. Chi Okafor's farming communities having to deal with, this additional problem because transportation is more expensive, and then the cycle is an issue in terms of when the honey, the cycle for her business. I think we also heard from others who talked about the leadership failure, especially since in this particular case, we had a similar experience in 2012. And so we've had a chance and an opportunity to try and address some of the challenges. There are people who raised the issues around the dredging of the River Niger and the River Benue, especially since there was a release on the other side of Cameroon in terms of water from their dams. There are people who have also talked about the fact that there hasn't been a sense of urgency with the leadership saying that they're giving 90 days for this for action to be taken when these are issues around well-being, issues that have both immediate effects, but also medium to long-term effects. I think people have raised the issues around. I think there was a medical doctor who spoke, and then the last person talked about Charles and Kerion, who talked about the issues around some of the challenges of air quality, acid rain. Some of my worries are the health effects of these challenges. Dr. Ovier gave us an opportunity to understand better some of how we can be more action oriented. He mentioned that we have a climate law. We have a climate commission, but the focus generally has been on building a bureaucracy rather than the more action-oriented approaches, for example, that the UK has taken. And then somebody else talked about the example of the Netherlands, or maybe it was Dr. Ovier who talked about the example of the Netherlands. Oh, I think somebody else gave the example of the Netherlands and how they've basically re-engineered their environment. And I find the Netherlands very interesting because one of the presidential candidates, Governor Peter Obi, has been explaining that, the land mass of a country like Netherlands is much smaller than many of our states. So he gives the example, I think, in some of what I've listened to, Niger State and Taraba State, and says that, these areas could become agricultural havens in terms of the exports of agricultural produce. When you think like the Netherlands, just their agricultural produce that they export is more than $100 billion. There were many other comments that were raised by different people. Our participant, who is both a policymaker and a scientist, really helped us understand some of the issues to think about in terms of policy formulation issues. So let's focus a little bit more on adaptation, because adaptation is a big issue for us, and the strategy in Nigeria seems to focus more on mitigation. We had Ngozika, who reminded us that that in 2010, that the Nigerian Erosion and Watershed Management Institution was set up, and that could have even helped us in 2012. And now in 2022, we're starting all over when we've got some of these agencies in place. There are people who've asked questions about what are the agencies of government. There's several agencies of government in place. There's NEMA, there's a number of other agencies. We've actually, as a country, Nigeria has been very good with articulating its nationally determined contributions, its strategy, and all of that. And I will remember when we go on to the next space to a quote that is in the report of the Climate Policy Initiative. But please let me then now have us have a presentation from my distinguished guest speaker, who I've invited to share with us from their report on the landscape of climate finance in Nigeria, which basically they produced this month. We were both at an event at the House of Commons where FSD Africa Climate Policy Initiative and the Children's Investment Fund was presenting to the all parties parliamentary group on Africa, the landscape of climate finance in Africa. And it was at that event that I found out that they had done something specific on Nigeria. So I'm very delighted that Shavi Mittal is with us. She's a senior analyst in London for the Climate Policy Initiative, bringing expertise in tracking and evaluating global and national climate finance trends and policies. She leads the Climate Policy Initiative's National Tracking Workstream, which aims to provide targeted support for countries to implement their climate finance tracking activities and develop their national strategies to implement NDCs, their nationally determined contributions. She has recently led the UNFCCC's biennial assessment and overview of climate finance flows report and the landscape of climate finance in Africa work, which she will touch on, but more specifically, touch on that for Nigeria. So Shavi, thank you very much for joining us. And could I hand over the mic to you?
Thanks, Arunma. Am I audible?
Sorry, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for that introduction. And you've been such an indomitable force in this space, so it's quite a pleasure and honor to be interacting with you and all the other participants who have joined on, such an important, this timely topic. As Anna mentioned, it's a follow from the Africa landscape study that we did with FT, SIF, and other and us that we did, kind of looking at the first of its kind of analysis of mapping climate finance flows that are going in the Africa in region in 2019 and 2020. And that looks at a lot of by sector, by source, and sort of instrument analysis. So yeah, happy to pass on that link to you, and you can visit that on our website. But moving on to today's topic, which is Nigeria. So me and my colleague Sean, who was also joined on this call, did a specific landscape of climate finance study in Nigeria.
Shavi, can I make a suggestion that may help? Can you present in blocks of 5 minutes, and I'll get a reaction from one person, and then you present another block of 5 minutes, and then we'll go till 6:50 UK time, and then I will start to summarize things, and if people have burning issues, they can then share it. So please go ahead.
Fantastic. So I was talking about the Nigeria case study, and we've done similar studies for Burkina Faso and Ethiopia, which we probably can discuss some other time. And just want to mention, why these case studies are sort of important apart from just getting a global or a regional perspective of Africa, because all these countries we kind of looked at, they have very different starting point and different resource endowments and, different development priorities as well, or and also capital and skills and capabilities. So, and what path they end up taking, low carbon development pathway they end up taking is very context dependent, right? And we've already seen, kind of established this in the last hour, how Nigeria is so highly vulnerable to these impacts of climate change, which includes agriculture and food security, floods and droughts, actually both, water stress and ecosystem stress as well. So, and also we need to look at the other aspect is that it is sort of at a very critical juncture in its development trajectory, which is faced with several overlapping and in in some cases also conflicting challenges as well, where you're looking at mitigating emissions, you're looking at adapting to the immediate and inevitable effects of climate change. As we saw in the case of flood, we need those resilient infrastructure investments, addressing energy poverty, I think, coping with debt exposure as well. And, also we saw that it has a rapidly expanding population, which will be fueling urbanization, industrialization. And all this is not just going to impact individuals, but national economy, right? And we see again what development pathway Nigeria can feasibly take, whether it's going to be a business as usual or a sustainable development will depend on this availability of climate finance. And that's why, we're really talking about money, as Arunma mentioned, is key here. So let me give you some of the numbers and, puts all these things in context for you, what numbers we were able to track for climate finance that's flowing in Nigeria. And I know, you said you were like half happy, half sad. So I think probably this one will make you more sad when you look at the numbers. Um, so what we were able to track in 2019, 2020 was an average 2 billion, less than 2 billion, actually 1.9 to be precise, of public and private capital was invested in climate related activities in Nigeria. And this is only 11% of their estimated needs, which is estimated at around 18 billion. And these are what countries have reported in their conditional NDCs, which they aim to achieve by 2030. So it's less than 10 year span that we have right now here. And let me put this 2 billion number in context as well and see where it sits. It's just only, when you compare it with the country's GDP, this is actually, and which is around 430 billion, it's just around 0.4, 0.5% climate financial percentage of their GDP. Also looking at fossil fuel financing, in the country, it has been sort of again dwarfed by the the whole climate finance is sort of dwarfed when you compare it with fossil fuel financing. We read through a study which said Africa has Nigeria kind of implemented, Nigeria has fossil fuel investment related to, I think it was really ranked second in terms of number of projects is financed in fossil fuel projects, and one liquefied natural gas project was alone 2.8 billion, and just compare with 2 billion that we just received in finance, and that's just one project I'm talking about. Also, let's look at, let's turn the table and think is opportunity. I think somebody mentioned we need to look at the opportunity and, what is the cost of inaction, and we've been talking about the 2012 damages, and the impact that had on the potential socioeconomic and development benefits and such investments can yield, and these effects that these floods have had on people. And why even go that far? Like, if you look at the severe floods that happened in Nigeria and since September, it has been deaths over 600 people and displaced 1.3 million. I've been hearing all these personal stories that a lot of colleagues mentioned here in the first hour. In fact, I mean, if you look at the numbers, just for comparison, like, so there was a World Bank report that sort of estimated the damages and losses from flooding in 2012, which was alone 17 billion. And it's 8 year
Sorry, you
down
mean
of
$17 billion?
$17 billion. Yeah, all the numbers are actually in dollars here.
No, because the reason I clarified this one was because in 2012, the then president had raised 17.6 billion naira
Okay.
For the flood relief. So I wanted people on the call to be clear that it was $17 billion that you're referring to. That 2012, this thing cost $17 billion.
Yeah. And also, I think even the projections, if you look, like, if if climate change is likely to cost Nigeria around 460 billion per annum by 2050, that is almost like 6 to 30, between 6 to 30% of the projected GDP. These are estimates and reports available out there. So just put this context, the 2 billion that we track versus all these numbers, and you'll see how minuscule the amount is, right? There's also been talk about adaptation and mitigation, and I mean, interestingly and quite counterintuitive is what you see on ground, that Africa strikes a relatively better balance between adaptation and mitigation, which is and this is just for Africa, that we saw in the Africa landscape report, where almost 30 or 40%, 39 or 40% of the climate finance that we tracked was actually into adaptation activities. But then that doesn't take the fact this is far below the needs. I think it was around 15 or 20% of the needs that we were able to track the adaptation. It was able to meet its adaptation needs. And this is again the same case we saw in Nigeria, right? Only 35% of its climate finance, a minuscule, I think 700 million, 60 or 700 million, was went into adaptation finance in Nigeria. And as Arunma mentioned, in Nigeria's 10 most vulnerable countries in the world as well, and the 52 of the countries that are vulnerable, um, it's the least ready country for adapting climate change. Lagos is one of the 11 sinking cities globally that could be underwater as well. So yeah, I mean, all these numbers should really scare us and like put us, into real action. Um,
Maybe you should pause here
sure.
for some reactions. I think you've shared some really. You're right that I feel even sadder I forgot what you said about Lagos being one of the. What did you say about Lagos? You said it's one of the
So it's one of the 11 sinking cities globally that could be soon underwater. This is
11 sinking cities, and
yeah.
that's essentially the commercial capital of Nigeria.
Um,
You said that for adaptation, we have only how much
30. So
less than $600 million versus a need that is what?
just less than 600 million in per annum of climate finance that was tracked.
Wow. And then 11% of what Nigeria itself has said it will need in terms of the nationally determined contribution. So you've made me really sad. I'd like to hear others if there are questions, if there are comments in terms of what you've heard. And I've just added sweet potato as a speaker. So please go ahead. Okay, sweet potato is not quite sure. What about Kennedy Osaru?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Aruma, for
Yes,
this
please go
opportunity.
ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about. I'm actually doing a research on. I'm studying in the UK, so I'm actually doing a research on climate change in regards to the assessment of decrease in the value of property in Nigeria due to flooding. So I've been enjoying this section so far. Uh, From my data that I've collected so far, it shows that human action are actually part of the major reason for climate change in Nigeria. And I don't know what the government is actually doing about it. We know we have policies in place, but it's not just to have policy, but it's also implementing those policies and ensuring that these companies are obtaining they are living as a sustainable business, because the emissions of greenhouse gases has really affected the climate change in our country. So I don't know what the government are doing about it to ensure that these companies are compliant in keeping their business sustainable, not just affecting the general country in that regards. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm trying to admit my co-host again because I just realized that he dropped off. But can I admitted somebody else to speak? Please go ahead. I'm trying to Cliff, please.
Yeah, thank you, Doc.
Hi, every
Thank you, Doc, for having me. So I have two concerns. The first one is in the area of financing. So it's very clear from what the speaker has said that there is still need for more financing to fight these climate change issues that are unraveling before us. But I want to also ask, even the finances that we have already invested, are we really measuring to see that these things are channeled into the specific use for which they have been provided for? And I'm asking this question because if you look at, for example, the case of malaria, where about $16.4 billion have been invested, it is still one of the top two causes of death in Nigeria as we speak. That's one. Two, a lot of organizations, from a regulatory perspective, we talk about operational resiliency, financial resilience. But when it comes to environmental resilience, people really don't pay attention about that. And if as an institution, you've been able to implement all the other aspects of resilience and, there is no global effort or holistic effort towards adopting environmental resilience in whatever we're doing, are we really going to make progress as serious corporate organizations?
Very important comments and questions that we've had. Shavi, do you want to react to his comment about the use of finance? And if you can, environmental resilience as well. And Kennedy Osaru had said he was looking at the decrease in value of property as part of his research. Any findings in that regard? And did you say Darshan is also on the call? Do you want him to say a few words?
Sure, I think you kind of the colleague kind of shared a very valid point. There is clear need for more transparency and reporting on impact outcomes of even the existing finance as well, like whether it kind of improved the resilience or not. There has been some recent efforts with OECD improving on how these public interventions mobilize private finance. As well as a bit on impact reporting, which is done a little better by climate funds, but not so much at a holistic level by all the stakeholders, all the financial providers. And it's sort of they kind of use a very varying approach, and there's like a poor project level reporting that's times efforts to integrate this data and the overall estimate. So we really want to see climate finance, but also want to see the impact, but it's just the data on it's so untransparent on our impact outcome is so patchy. I think it's important that all the DFIs, development financial institutions, need to provide much more granular data, project level information on both mitigation and adaptation outcomes. We need to kind of move towards more standardized approaches, kind of do a better streamlined reporting and, analysis, like more efforts on such reporting that really helps us identify opportunity, and it leads to better impact outcomes, would lead to better identification of opportunities where investment has the greatest impact, right? But yeah, that data is really not there.
Okay.
There was question on adaptation risk, and I think this is something that was also raised in the first session where somebody mentioned that um adaptation needs, I mean, firstly, even we even with the governments, when we're doing a need assessment, kind of looking at what the countries report in NDC, a lot of countries said that they kind of lack the technical and data experience on estimating and costing adaptation measures. As you know, it's, as you can imagine, it's not as simple as mitigation. It's more like it's not often related to a very single technological change or a sector, but it's sort of mainstream with a lot of other interventions that that's undertaken, and which can also take time to demonstrate results, which cannot be really measured in the short term. So it's very difficult to kind of measure adaptation cost and adaptation needs as well. So that's something we kind of highlighted again in our needs brief report. So definitely, I think there should be governments should really strengthen adaptation risk analysis and work with development partners to build that capacity, right? So we should be looking how to kind of boost just analyzing adaptation risk, both upstreams as well. Even at the debt sustainability analysis and doing macro modelings, and also at downstream activities. So looking at project designs, or you're looking at implementation. So all these information really needs to be incorporated. Climate information analytics that needs to provide very localized climate risk and vulnerability data. So it's eventually it also comes down to a lot of data gaps that do we face while tracking such climate finance, even at even not just at the global or a regional level, but also at the country level.
Thank you. So please go ahead with the second part of your remarks.
Sure. So, I mean, let me give you a bit of sectoral flavor also, like what we found where the most finance was flowing, and this was we identified was going into a lot more into energy related mitigation projects. I mean, adaptation was something of on the back burner a bit. So we saw that almost, I think, 66% of the total climate finance that we tracked was actually flowing into energy sector. Mostly, I think it's understandable because a lot is a more commercially viable profile, right? Those investments have. But again, this falls again short of needs when you look at. So I think the NDC's kind of put the annual needs to be 12.2 billion for energy sector alone. And then, of course, we have Nigeria just announced its energy transition plan also, which is probably again will be needing a lot more money. So we are falling short on sectoral sector. There very 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 vast sectoral gaps in there as well. Another sector I think that's very relevant is the agriculture, forestry, and land use investments. Right. we just tracked around 300 billion in that sector. Again, it is just 16% of the total climate finance, and it is minimum relative to, even if you see the sector share in GDP, right? It's the what, 25%, and of course, given its vulnerability to climate change, this is again sort of falling short. I know we talked about flooding, and this is sort of water and disaster risk management. All these are sort of a very cross sectoral investment profile. What we saw was that again, waste water and industrial process and product use, which is a sector in NDC in its entirety. Uh, it was again like we were not able to track much finance. I think uh, most of the finance was actually, there was a couple of minor projects in millions that were there in water supply, providing sort of basic water access to I think 70% of Nigerian. It's also that was less again. And these were like key adaptation strategies that are identified in the water sector, relates to reducing water losses from dams and evaporation. There's adopting more efficient irrigation practices, and I mean, I'm just giving examples of different kind of investments that's been there. Um yeah, and I mean, disaster risk management, there's a 140 million project by European Investment Bank that kind of looked at the gully erosion control and slope stabilization and watershed management. And there were like few of these different projects that were pretty much cross cutting across all sectors, so they fit in a lot in the cross sectoral category of our project. Just also want to highlight another thing was that almost 2 billion that was tracked in climate finance, including both mitigation and adaptation. All of it, I mean, almost I think 77 or 77 or 80% was actually from international public actors. So there's a very, like, private sector is really lagging behind in these investments in the country. um and when I say public investments, this basically relates to multilateral development financial institutions, your bilateral DFIs, or even development partners and governments there. um so yeah, I mean, we do see a need for, like, why private sector is not coming in. I mean, there are a lot of factors, but there's a clear need for de-risking these high risk investments, especially in adaptation. I mean, adaptation probably has a better profile in terms of just energy sector, but for adaptation, we definitely need sort of more blended finance instruments. We need better, well-designed guarantees, and first loss investments and whatnot, to kind of enable those private sector action in the country. Um, and I think, let me just put my last point in there and then pass on to you, Anuma, for opening it another session. Was there was strong, and this may come as a surprise, a strong preference for debt was witnessed in Nigeria. Predominantly, all the climate finance, out of all the climate finance, I think 3/4 to 75% was in the form of debt, and these debt was like concessional debt, included both concessional debt and non-concessional debt as well. And grants and equity-based finance, which is more like the private sector, was relatively minor role, accounting for less than 20%. Um, yeah, I mean, of course, this how instruments are used to transact this climate finance varies across sectors and even actors, but a lot of mitigation finance was channeled through more diverse range of instruments, whereas adaptation was actually heavily financed by debt, with low cost debt, mainly low cost debt. And the reliance of in debt, for adaptation sort of raises again question in terms of the sustainability of the country's debt profile, right? Especially as frequency of climate shock increase, leaving very little fiscal space for recovery and mounting adaptation finance needs that we just talked about. Um, yeah, I
Okay,
think.
so maybe it's a good place to pause to hear any reactions. Thank you so much. I think you've covered quite some ground. One, how we can, if we're going to have impact assessment, then we need better project level reporting. We need more data. You talked about the kinds of instruments Nigeria has tended to use, mainly debt, concessional debt. So the design of the instruments is also important. Somebody in the earlier session on flood in Nigeria had asked about how can we get the private sector to be much more involved. So your data sharing that most of the financing today is coming from multilateral agencies is an important one. So there is scope for more to be done. I also just want to take this opportunity to recognize two amazing women who I didn't know had joined the space, but I took some time to find out. So the Nigerian ambassador to Greece, who is particularly, these issues are very important to her. Ambassador Akinkube, thank you very much for joining the space. I also see that we have Madam Kaba, who's recently joined the African Development Bank as the Director of Gender at the African Development Bank, but she was Minister of Finance and the Economy for Guinea previously. Thank you for the attention and the interest that you have on these issues. I see many others on the call. So could I ask, I think it was Unaibi Kaiser who had requested the mic. Please go
Yes,
ahead.
yeah, sure. Thank you. As a layman, I'm not a scholar. As a layman, I'm speaking for all of us, for the underdeveloped countries, like you can see Pakistan, where I live, and my deepest condolences through Nigeria and the people who are going through this trauma. This is beyond words. We cannot describe it. People being uprooted from their homes, from their lands, billions of people, affected by these floods. And we are the third world countries, Nigeria, Pakistan. These are all of these are underdeveloped countries. And the thing is that we are not, participating in carbon emission as much as those countries through which we all are suffering. And those are, if you see the futuristic hope of Earth, we see Elon Musk, we see other guys. They are planning to go out in space. They are planning to be a multi-planetary species because I think people are losing hope in Earth. We as humankind have lost hope on Earth that it's going to be a catastrophe. Climate change is worsening day by day, and as a layman, I think as I see most reputed persons that are ahead in technology, like you can see Elon Musk and others, they looks like they have lost hope in Earth. They are, uh, going towards the next solution. And we, the third world countries who are suffering a lot, Nigeria, Pakistan, and there will be many more because the climate change is worsening. And the countries who are producing the emission like China, USA, and Russia and others, they are not doing anything to decrease or even trying to somehow get through the solution or do something about it. uh, Donations won't work. Donations won't work for us. You can't give money in exchange of life, in exchange of land, in exchange of tradition that the land holds. So I am very depressed about as a youngster. I see that our voice will not be heard around the world, and people who are there at the level of technology are looking towards the other solutions, like going to Mars or evacuating Earth. It feels like an emergency, but it will be like 100 years in the making. But it will be looked as an evacuation from Earth, and eventually climate, Mother Nature doesn't stop.
Thank you so
We
much. These are
Thank
such
you.
philosophical and so they're so important. And really points for us to reflect on. You cannot money cannot buy life. That's poignant. People are losing hope. People like Elon Musk are looking for solutions on Mars. Very, very, very poignant points that you've made. Can I then have Olutoke Jide Samuel next? And
Thank
then
you.
Informa Onyebuchi after that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aruma, and thank you, Travi. Nice to hear your voice again. My name is Jide. I worked on climate finance in Duke University here in the US, and thanks for this platform. So my question is actually specifically to both Dr. Haruma and to Travi. I'm looking at CPI report that says that bulk of climate finance that are being raised are spent domestically within all these countries. So as much as all countries are trying to raise their just energy transition plans, we saw that with South Africa, with Indonesia and India. Nigeria also did that in the last couple of weeks. How are we ensuring that local financing organizations within each of the countries can also catalyze investment? I mean, Dr. Haruma was a DG of SEC at some point in Nigeria. I'm looking at the AUM of Nigerian banks and Nigerian capital markets, and I'm saying if we are to, I know we're trying to mobilize finance from developed countries to developing countries, but with what happened with COVID, all money is for themselves. You could see that all countries actually focus on themselves during COVID. And this is also the pattern we've seen with climate change. How are we ensuring that local financing activities like asset management and pension fund are being mobilized to actually support climate finance within each of their countries? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take your form and then we'll respond. Both Shavi and I will respond to the comment. Ifoma, please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity, Dr. Aruna. And Shavi, thanks so much for the presentation. Lots of things and lots of data you put out there really resonated. And I personally think that, programming efforts towards mitigating extreme weather events should really target contextual realities. And when you talked about adaptation, the need for adaptation strategies to, to be to reflect or sort of integrate other program effort, what just came to my mind was social protection, because given the fact that we came out from, we are still struggling with a lot of inflation, economic shock, and the effect of COVID-19, and I can see the issue, the humanitarian crisis that this flood has created for Nigeria. And I could just picture like people who are already struggling with a lot of vulnerable people in this instance who are already struggling with their livelihood and everything, and how this flood issue will really impact them and push them further down into the poverty line. And I was also wondering if your research or effort that we could make internally at the country level to sort of because we have institutions and there are already institutional efforts at trying to tackle social protection, but I'm just wondering if you sort of touched on things around disaster risk reduction, and how climate change adaptation can actually capture some of this efforts around social protection, social assistance, and also disaster reduction, because these are like three different things but are sort of integrated in one way or the other. Just to save
thank you very much. Very important contribution. Shavi, do you want to go first, and then I will complement what you share?
Sure. To answer, I think his question first. He rightly talked about how a private sector, whether the pension funds, insurance funds, they are really currently untapped source of capital financing. I mean, for example, Nigeria's pension sector is actually second large in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And growing over several 10 times or something in value, etc. over the last decade. But really, no climate finance was tracked from pension funds and asset managers, mainly because I mean, that's one thing. Again, it comes back to question of like getting data on like tagging of investments. Like even the government, like if you look at the public government budget expenditure, they're also not tagged for climate relevance of their investments. And that's something we've been pushing with working with a lot of countries like Kenya or South Africa to kind of push for that domestic budget tagging exercise. And this again leads to another thing that came up in the first session, accountability of civil society as well, basically demanding from the government as well, kind of making sure they and working through development partners, etc., with and demand from the civil society on how to make sure the expenditure is taking into account the climate impact. Let me give an example. So Bangladesh really have a citizen climate budget. So budget report that they publish. I don't know if it's annually or biannually, but where kind of simplify all the information that's needed for climate, for general public, trying to understand and make sure the investments that they're making is actually aligned. Um, so that's an accountability, and so yeah, definitely, private sector our role is sort of important. You ask how we can make sure we are mobilizing a lot more private finance sectors. I think I mentioned that. I mean, we need to kind of use public finance very strategically, via targeted instruments like, again, guarantees and those insurance and, investment losses to help like de-risk the projects which are like sort of difficult to get private finance in general. So there's need to like crowd in the much needed private sector through these innovative financing structures that needs to be deployed, to improve the capital efficiency and overcoming these barriers. Um, and also again, public sectors can especially offer and exploit their ability to offer like patient capital for market building activities. We had the climate finance accelerator, I think that's right. There's an initiative, and there's Nigeria Climate Innovation Center also, which is kind of developing these credible strategies to sort of work through this, engaging more and more private sector in. So yeah, definitely, that's
Okay, thank you. Let me complement what you've shared in that respect, and it's really just to emphasize some of the points that you've made. Clearly, the needs are huge. Shavi, one of the first points she made was Nigeria says it has needs, and today annually we're only seeing 11% of that. So there's scope for much more money. So domestic resource mobilization is extremely important. And Shavi shared some ideas about how those resources can be mobilized. One of them is, of course, as you mentioned, the pension funds. And unfortunately, today, a lot of the pension funds are still investing in government securities. And so the appetite for risk is still very low. And that's why Shavi's point around the government seeking ways to de-risk investments by providing guarantees, taking the first loss. So I think also innovation from the capital markets is extremely important. FSD Africa has been at the forefront of showcasing demonstration projects in this regard. Countries like Nigeria, Egypt, and others have also issued instruments like green bonds as a way to showcase what is possible. So it is an area that is extremely important. One of the exchanges in Nigeria, FMDQ, set up a sustainability initiative. And what I'm hoping is that can encourage more focus on developing the kinds of instruments that speak to these kinds of issues. Ifeoma had talked about the fact that these are very, very difficult times. Inflation is skyrocketing. And by the way, one of the impacts of the floods is more inflation, because if farms like those owned by Chiokafo cannot get their goods to market, things are going to be much more expensive. I mean, we all feel inflation directly in our pocketbook. She talked about the impact of COVID, the impact of the humanitarian crisis. And therefore, disaster risk management instruments are extremely important. We need to develop the insurance industry much more in the country, because in a number of other countries, they take flood insurance. There's flood insurance at the level of the individual. There's flood insurance at the level of corporates. There's flood insurance at the level of subnationals. And one of the challenges today is that I do not think that in Nigeria that all of those instruments are sufficiently developed. And so people are basically having to pay outright when there are damages. So those losses, I don't know if in 2012, Xavi, as you said, the World Bank reported that the damage was estimated at $17 billion in Nigeria. I don't know, what it's going to be today. It's going to be much, much worse. Yet, there's no insurance to support individuals or to support entities in that respect. So very important point around disaster risk management and those instruments. It's now 10 minutes to the hour. I'd like to try something different, which is to ask those who want to speak to, and I see that Oloyinka is double dipping, so he's going to start. He's going to have to start for us. If people want to just share two or three takeaways, very briefly as well. I see that my co-host is back, Benjamin, and he's got his hands up as well. Since you're a co-host, why don't you go first, Benjamin, and then Oloyinka, and I think we have a few other requests, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Roman and every other person who are present here. Our special guest, Ms. Xavi Mentel, I want to say thank you for your time, for taking our time to be part of this program. Well, I'm sorry that I was not fully on ground today. Work and duty calls. My brother, my co-host, Manzi Eze, I want to say thank you guys. And I hope this program, we're going to repeat it once again. Doctor, it's a very lively one. It has been very, very educative, although I've not been here. I've been listening all this while. Please, we don't have much time. Like the doctor said, we only have 10 minutes. Can we go on with the Olayinka? Just make use of the 1 minute judiciously so that we can go around with the people in the speaker session. Thank you and God bless you as you go on with it.
All right, thanks a lot. So I just quickly checked and examined the policies that Nigeria has for climate action, and I saw that we had an ecological fund set up in 1981. That's almost as old as I am. That's over 40 years ago. And one of the difficulties experienced, even though we have, I think, over 500 and something billion in that ecological fund, is that it's been disbursed for the wrong projects, even though the local government, state governments, and even the federal government has dipped its hands into those funds. So accountability is key. I'm thinking of having something like what Budget IT is doing so that we can track what is going on with the ecological funds. I also think that we should be able to delineate between climate financing and climate investment. I think it's skewed more towards donations and all of that rather than investing and encouraging investment in climate action. But so much work needs to be done there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Very important points. Who hasn't spoken and wants to go next? Ngozi, you're triple dipping. Please go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to say something quickly that if we're going to get this right in the long term, we're going to need to localize this. We're going to need to go to the grassroots. A lot of people, like where I come from this year, the corns did not do well. The corns did not do well. All the farmers were complaining from the southeast, and this has not happened for before. So I just want to say that if we are going to get it right at some point, we are going to really need to go to the grassroots and get the people directly involved in the education about climate change and its effects. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate or Corey?
Hello, everybody. Thank you once again. Ms. Xavi, thank you for the very, very insightful session. So as it concerns the climate financing, I just have to bring in a health angle here. So from covering topics in the public health sector of Nigeria, I have realized that when the government partners with private individuals, that's the public-private partnerships, those initiatives that involve the private individuals tend to do so well. And I could give an instance like the farm access that is helping to transform healthcare in Delta State. And just like Mr. Oluyinka said about the problem of accountability, it's such a problem that has eaten deep into the it's a major problem here in Nigeria. And I really hope that when this funding, because when we go to Egypt now, there's going to be a lot of argument as it concerns the loss and damage. And I really hope that when these funds are being put out there, that we can push for the government to do much more by collaborating with private individuals to actually make a change. Because based on what I have noticed is that when private individuals are involved, there tends to be more impact. So yeah, this is just what I hope to add, and I hope we can have another session before COP27.
I like yours and Benjamin's hopes. I hope so too. I'm just, I like all of you. I'm extremely busy, so it's we'll see. Because I think the first day is Sunday, the 6th of November. So that's literally 10 days from now. So I don't know if we'll be able to have it. Benjamin and Mazi know all of the work in the background, and Shavi, in respect of today, that goes into putting this together. But I'm very passionate, and if I do have time and can get other speakers, we will try and host something. But I don't know. Given my portfolio of, I have a lot going on. But this is important, and that's why I'm doing my best to host the sessions. I think what is important is what each one of us can do. Unaibi, did you want to say something else? Because I like to end right on time, and I was going to say something at the end. So I need a minute or two, and Shavi needs, I'd like to give her an opportunity to say a few words as well, to take a minute or two. So is
Yeah,
there anybody who's got a burning issue? Okay, you have a burning issue. Go ahead.
yeah. Just need to say this thing. We don't need to normalize. We don't have to normalize these floods. We have to raise the voice. We need to get it up on the bigger level. And if you can raise the voice, if anyone here can raise the voice, we cannot normalize these floods. They will come and go, and we will do what? Just rebuild again and again? We can't do that. We need to raise the voice. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Shavi, do you want to please go ahead and say something to close, and then I'll close the space.
Sure. I think just on, I think Unaib kind of mentioned how depressed he is, and of course, when you see all these things, personal stories, etc., that happens. But I'm sort of an eternal optimist as well, and that's sort of an oxymoron because I'm also an economist. So it's weird to have an optimistic, optimist economist there. But I really believe that it's time of crisis, that big reforms can really be achieved, and we need to really understand and twist the narrative about it as an opportunity, and understand the cost of business as usual. It's so high, and all these climate investments, they are linked to the broader SDGs, and this seems to be a most reliable path out for all these multiple interlinked crises we currently face, and also like more national centric objectives that many African countries like Nigeria also facing, national security, energy dependent independence, and all those things. And all of this can be achieved in part or substantially through climate investments as well. And these net zero transitions that we're talking about are building infrastructure, resilient infrastructure that incorporates these sort of just transition principles, etc. So yes, I mean, I really believe that for all these reasons, we need sort of more ambition, and we'll successfully navigate, and we will not successfully navigate out of these crises without bold leadership and action, as a lot of people has highlighted. So, yeah, I just want to end there, and hopefully we are taking these thoughts out there in negotiations and doing some evidence based policy making in those places.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Well,
Arunma.
thank you very much, Shavi, for honoring my request to you and for what you've shared with us, the rigor of the analysis that you and your colleagues at Climate Policy Initiative have done has enabled us just understand better the sources of finance, the instruments, the what's going on in mitigation, what's going on in adaptation. I'm really happy that there are deep dives into by country, and you say you've also done Burkina Faso and Ethiopia. All of this is available on the Climate Policy Initiative website. So if you Google Climate Policy Initiative, you'll be able to read about climate, the landscape of climate finance for Africa, and also the landscape of climate finance in Nigeria and Burkina Faso and Ethiopia. What I would just like to say is, first of all, thank you very much to each one of you. I think the starting point is I always say that change begins with each one of us. So, yes, there may be leadership failure, there may be corruption, there may be lack of accountability, there may be lack of empathy, because I do think that if we've had the kinds of floods we've had in Nigeria or in Pakistan, leaders should be there. That should be their primary focus. But what is it? What are other people doing? What are we doing as a civil society to hold leaders accountable? I liked very much what Shavi said, that the government of Bangladesh produces a citizen climate report so that the citizens are able to understand what's going on. One of my objectives for having this space is essentially to ensure that we're all learning from each other as to what needs to be done. I've learned a lot from each of the speakers, so I do want to thank all of the speakers who spoke today for their very important contributions. I will say that this is an issue that requires utmost attention. In Shavin, in your report on Nigeria, you do quote the president of Nigeria at COP26, where he says that for Nigeria, climate change is not about the perils of tomorrow, but that the issues are for today. So the president recognizes this. What we need to do is to make sure that our actions match our words. I think it was Oluyinka who mentioned that the ecological fund was set up in 1981. What has it done for people like Ms. Okorie and who are journalists? You should ask those questions to your leaders. If we have an ecological fund that was set up in 1981, what's happened with that? The second, somebody mentioned, one of you mentioned the Nigerian Erosion Management Agency, which was set up in 2010. And you're asking the question, why does it not exist today? So let us hold our leaders to account. Let us do our own bit. Let us learn so that we understand what's happening around the world. I thought what Dr. Vie shared with us and others shared with us about the examples of other countries, how the UK is making sure that their law is actionable, how the Netherlands is re-engineering their space so that they're able to benefit from that space. The conversations around what the private sector can do more of, the huge gap. We need basically 89% of funding. We only have 11% of what Nigeria needs. So my final word is, please let us use what we have. Each one of us who's on this space has a Twitter account. So Bring these issues to the attention of others. Bring these issues to the attention of your leaders. Write your parliamentarians, your senators, your House of Rep members about the issues in the particular parts of Nigeria that you're in, or in the particular parts of the world that you're in. Ask them questions, hold them to account. It's not just an NGO that holds people to account. COP27 is a conference of parties of Africa. It is going to be an important one. So prepare yourself to be able to ask those questions. Fortunately, social media allows us to ask questions, to hold people accountable. And for those who will be at COP27, we hope that you'll represent all of us well. Thank you very much, everyone. I will now close the space, and I look forward to another opportunity to engage